Hello and welcome to Not Just Ads. Augustine Fou is a cybersecurity and ad fraud expert who has been for years at the forefront in the fight for more transparency in the digital advertising and media ecosystem. He mainly works with media agencies and advertisers, but this time I asked him to give advice to media owners on how to highlight the value of their advertising propositions and approach their clients more effectively. Enjoy. Hi, Augustine. Nice to see you here at Not Just Ads.
Hello, Alessandro. Glad to be here with you.
And you are an ad fraud and cybersecurity expert. You have contributed so much to this movement, the transparency movement in the industry. But what I'm really interested in knowing is your trajectory and what each area of the industry brought to you and made of you the professional you are today.
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. I started at McKinsey & Company here in New York in 95. And I saw that the internet was about to come out of academia and military and spill out into the public sector. So at that point in time, I realized the internet was going to change entire industries. And obviously, we've seen that happen in the last 25 years or so. So in early 96, I decided to leave McKinsey and get into my first consulting venture. And at the time, it basically meant convincing clients they needed a website because most people didn't have websites back then. And obviously, much has changed, in the intervening 25 years. I've been focused on the advertising sector and, how digital advertising has changed advertising in general. And I've also worked on both the client side at American Express, as well as the agency side at Interpublic Group and Omnicom. So both of those experiences were very essential in terms of, seeing how advertising is being done at both the client, the big advertiser, and also at the agency. But one of the key turning points was when I was at Omnicom, we were observing our client campaigns, which were mostly paid search campaigns. We were seeing greater than 100% click-through rates. So there were more clicks than there were ad impressions. And in fact, in some cases, even after we turned off the campaign, the clicks still kept coming. So at the time, it's like we were wondering what was going on. And
that was
nobody could really.
The aha
Yeah,
moment.
exactly. It's like, I got to do something about it. I have to figure this out because no one else really knew what was going on. 15 years later, we all know it's bot traffic and bot clicks on the ads. But back then, nobody really knew what was going on. So I started in 2011, 2012 to start building a set of tools, which is now known as Fou Analytics. And we use those to help audit campaigns. So we basically go in there, put the code on the website, and see if we could tell why we were getting so many clicks, even if the ads were not running, right? Or even if the campaign was not running. And, so that's how we got started in terms of the research around ad fraud and bots and other forms of criminal activity impacting digital advertising.
And did you become immediately vocal? How did it work? Because I know exactly the moment when I became vocal. What about you?
Yeah. I mean, basically, I was writing on LinkedIn. I was kind of sharing my thoughts. And because I had the data, right, we could very easily see that these were non-human activity, right? These are visitors that were deliberately causing the ads to load and clicking on them. We could see that in the data. So I started, talking about it and writing about the phenomenon, right? The fraud phenomenon. But so I was vocal right away. But what I didn't expect was that, a lot of the parties, like the advertisers, the agencies, really didn't want to hear it. Because I think at the time, everyone was caught up in the euphoria of this new form of digital advertising, this new form of advertising called digital or online advertising. So everyone wanted to keep buying it, pouring more money into it. It made them feel innovative at the time. So really, I was met with a wall of resistance. Nobody wanted to hear it. And they said, oh, you must be wrong. There must be some other explanation for it. So I was vocal, but, only to find out that a lot of people pushed back and didn't want to hear about it.
Well, and fast forward to today, it's a completely different era. But do you think that the industry is improving?
I finally do, yes. So, for most of the 13 years that I've been doing this ad fraud research, there's been tremendous resistance, both from the advertisers who are spending the money and the agencies who are managing their campaigns, right? But I think, and I think a lot of that was caused by, people just not wanting to be the one to rock the boat, right? So they just wanted to keep doing what they were used to doing and what they were familiar with. So prior to the pandemic, nobody wanted to rock the boat, but this external shock called the COVID-19 pandemic rocked the boat for everyone. So I think I've been seeing a dramatic turnaround after the pandemic, right? So advertisers were kind of awoken, right? So they was like, what's going on here? We have to look into this. We know that budgets are getting tighter. So they're now asking harder questions and not just assuming everything's fine. So I think it really took an external shock to really wake everybody up. And so now finally things are turning around. So I am hopeful, and I do see that the industry is starting to get better because the advertisers are actually asking harder questions and pushing harder, right? Pushing their agencies to look into this more closely and not just assume everything's fine.
And I share your optimism, although there are a few topics that I would like to discuss with you. One
Mhm.
is regarding, I think always we need to be honest about history in order to understand where we are today and to shape a better future. So when I look at the antitrust case, the DOJ versus Google, I'm thinking, okay, this is an opportunity as well to, and I'm not denying Google's dominance at all, and I'm not denying all the issues that it caused, but it's very dangerous to say, as many in the industry do, oh, it was Google's fault, and we are today where we are because of Google. What is your perspective on this?
Yeah, I completely agree. So Google is a monopoly, and that's because they did a really good job on the business side of things, right? But because they had such dominant power for so long, they were able to do things that normal companies would not have been able to do. So some of those obviously are considered anti-competitive and kind of harming or harmful to small businesses and ad tech companies. So I wouldn't put the blame only on Google, but I would say that a lot of the ad tech companies uh, in their priority to make money, they threw a lot of things by the wayside, right? Whether it's privacy concerns, whether it's ethics, all of those things just went out the door. So I've seen that over and over again. And I think a lot of that just contributed to the relatively difficult state of affairs that we're in right now. Because on the one hand, the advertisers spending the money are not getting the impact that they should be getting from the ads, because a lot of those ads are not even shown to humans, right? They're shown to bots and other software programs. And then the legitimate publishers, like the news publishers, have been harmed for the last 15 years, right? All of them have seen revenue declines and margin compression because the advertisers and the buyers were just chasing low cost ads somewhere else. So even the legitimate publishers are finding it hard to survive. So I think in that entire ecosystem, right, we see lots of different harms, lots of different negative effects that have been caused by the ad tech industrial complex, if you will. So I wouldn't put all the blame on Google. Google's part of the ad tech industrial complex, but there were many other ad tech companies that are responsible for the really sad state of affairs that we are in right now in digital advertising.
I actually give the blame, the original thing, in my opinion, has been the embracing of the open marketplace. Without the programmatic open marketplace, probably the situation where we are today, and whatever happened with Google and whatever happened with many other ad tech companies and bad situations in the industry wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I can see that evolution, right? So when advertisers bought from publishers directly, they could actually see who those publishers were, right? So, but once they started buying from programmatic exchanges, this was like in the 2011, 2012 timeframe when programmatic media buying became mainstream. Once you started putting money into the exchanges, that created the loophole for many fraudsters and other criminal organizations to get involved. So they could set up tens of thousands of websites and put it into the ad exchange. And then the big advertisers would inadvertently buy ads on those fake websites. And the other thing that you've seen recently is the proliferation of disinformation websites, right, or fake news websites. The way they make money is through digital advertising. So they're just hidden in the hundreds of thousands of rows in your placement report. So most people don't look that closely. So that's now enabled. So programmatic advertising, the open exchanges have allowed criminals, disinformation parties to actually make money so that they can continue to expand their disinformation operations. So again, that has kind of network effects and it's kind of spilled over into real world harm.
But I have, well, absolutely, I agree. But I have this feeling, and I said earlier, I share the optimism, and I'm very optimistic about the future. But I think we are not going as fast as we could, in the sense that I feel that even when we talk about transparency, we are still unable, at least for quality media and quality digital advertising, to see a future without the programmatic open marketplace. I use this analogy about an overflowing sink. We are not fixing the tap, because if we fix the tap, a lot of business models will collapse. What we are doing in the industry, even when we talk about transparency, and even people that are vocal about transparency are talking about how do we mop around the sink while the tap while the sink keeps overflowing.
Yeah, and the reason we're not moving very fast is because it's almost like a re-education process for the advertisers. So the advertisers have been led down this path by the ad tech companies and Google and Meta for 15 years. And they've been led to believe that there's billions upon billions of impressions to buy so that they can increase their reach and frequency. So that's a concept that worked well in TV advertising, right? So decades ago, the more people you reached with your ads, the more people will buy your product. But the difference here in digital is that those tens of billions of impressions being purchased every month are not even reaching people. So that kind of intersects with my research, which is ad fraud. Right? The vast majority of those impressions are going on fake sites that humans have never heard of before and therefore are not visiting. And the ads are shown to software programs called bots that are just repeatedly loading the impressions. The reasons the advertisers didn't understand that these were not human is because when they relied on the legacy fraud verification companies, all of them just kept reporting 1% IVT, invalid traffic, for the past 8 years consistently. So they thought everything was fine simply because they were not marked as invalid traffic. So it's a failure of the legacy fraud verification companies that has led to advertisers over investing in the open market and therefore taking dollars away from legitimate publishers. So you can see how there's multiple layers of these effects where now, what is getting funded are the fake sites and the real publishers are finding it hard to survive. But I do think that if we can better educate the advertisers, we can accelerate this process. So something very basic is that, you don't need to buy 10 billion impressions per month to get your reach and frequency, right? You need to get real human reach, not just reach, right? Because a lot of that, if you understand, it's shown to bots and software programs, not humans. So I think if the advertisers start to understand that, they will spend less money, right? Buy fewer ad impressions. Even if it's at a higher CPM price, they will still be saving money. And in fact, more of those dollars will be going to legitimate publishers that actually have human audiences, right? So I think we can start this virtuous cycle again and make everything better, both for the advertisers in terms of the marketing outcomes, as well as the publishers making enough ad revenue to actually survive.
And I agree. And I'm an advocate of quality media. I'm supporting quality media. I'm working with quality media owners. But I'm also, I mean, I can't turn the other way when I see the issue. Is definitely the way you have described, but I think also that quality media owners, by choosing of being present in the programmatic open marketplace, they are legitimizing that environment while
Yeah,
they
and they're
should.
harming their own inventory. Yeah.
Exactly. They are devaluing themselves and while legitimizing bad actors.
Yeah. I think one of the bad habits that the sellers or the publishers got into was years ago, they said, oh, well, we have some of this unsold inventory. Let's just try to sell that on open exchange. And that even if we get a few cents on the dollar, it's still better than $0. Right. I think that misunderstanding, led to a lot of good publishers putting inventory into exchanges. And essentially, they're selling next to the bad guys, right? They're selling next to entirely fake sites. And again, this goes back to the failure of the fraud verification companies. If they marked the fake sites at 1% fraud and they marked the real publishers at 1% fraud, you can understand why the ad buyers will say, well, they're both about the same. So why would I pay $30 for a legitimate publisher's inventory, remnant inventory, when I can pay 30 cents for, the same stuff that's also 1% fraud over here? So again, that created the problem that just got worse and worse over time. Because for the legitimate publishers, we've actually seen cases where the buyers would simply wait until the inventory went remnant, right? Went unsold. And so the publishers
Bingo.
are desperate to sell it on programmatic. So, oh yeah, we can get it for 1/100th the cost. And so again, when you're selling through programmatic, there's just many different things. Like we said, they devalue their own inventory, right? Because the advertisers will say, why would I pay $30? Why would I pay full price buying direct from you, right? They would just put more and more money into programmatic.
And this is the one thing that I think will definitely change the outcomes. And I think, for example, when we talk about brand safety, well, brand safety, you need to filter out the rubbish when the rubbish is in by design. You are letting the rubbish in, and then you also try to filter it out. While if you had a quality environment, a tier one digital advertising, it would be almost redundant. Or who did?
And I think the publishers and the sellers were led or misled by the ad tech companies into thinking, oh, we want to make sure we pay for some tech, like the brand safety detection tech, to make sure our ads don't show up next to a war photo or, like a murder news story or something like that. But in essence, what ended up happening was back in like 2020, it was very clear. The front page of Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, because they had to write about the COVID pandemic, when the advertisers blocked the word COVID, right, for brand safety issues, the front page of those legitimate publishers got defunded, right, demonetized because the ads couldn't run. Okay, so in those cases, it actually caused the harm to the legitimate publishers, but because the advertisers still had to spend the money, where do you think that money went, right? It went to all the programmatic sites, all the bad guys sites. So more and more of that money flowed to the fake news sites, the disinformation sites, and the fake websites instead of to legitimate publishers. So we could actually see that, right? They were sold on this idea of brand safety when we've seen for decades that advertising on the evening news is perfectly fine. And humans, right, when they see the ad next to the local news story, they don't associate that, right? It's not like it creates a negative image in their mind. Right? So a lot
100%.
of these things are extra cost that the advertisers incurred, the publishers incurred, and none of it did any good for the entire ecosystem.
Do you see in the data the benefits of working with quality media? Or better, what is that you see?
Yeah, so for me, quality media in terms of the content is a very subjective thing. So I
Absolutely.
typically focus on human or not. So it's very simple. The legitimate publishers that you have heard of or that humans have heard of have large human audiences, right? So I can see that in my data and it shows up as dark blue, right? So dark blue means humans, dark red means bots in Fou Analytics. So legitimate publishers have a lot of dark blue. And when you buy through programmatic, there's a ton of illegitimate publishers in there where it's mostly red. So the way I kind of summarize it to the advertisers is if you buy ads through programmatic, it might be cheaper in CPM, right? CPMs are a price, not a cost, but the prices, right, look a lot lower. But if only 10% of your ads, so 1 in 10 ads is shown to a human, you essentially have to buy 10 times the quantity to be the equivalent of just buying ads from a real publisher in the first place, right? That's just a simple ratio, but more often than not, it's actually 1 to 100, right? So if only 1% of your ads are shown to humans when you're buying through programmatic, you have to buy 100 times the quantity. So no matter how cheap the CPM is, right? The CPM again is a price, not a cost. If you multiply that by 100 times the quantity, you're still wasting a ton of money. So the best practice for advertisers, and some of them are finally coming around to this, right? So the best practice for advertisers is to buy as much direct from publishers as possible so that they can get their ads in front of humans. That's the first priority above all else, because if your ad's not even shown to a human, then none of the other things like viewability, attention, attentiveness, all of that kind of stuff is not going to matter if the ad wasn't even shown to a human in the first place. So I think finally the advertisers are coming around and understanding that even if they pay a low price in programmatic, they're not actually getting what they thought they were getting.
And as it takes two to tango, let me send a message to media owners, to media companies. Well, go direct as well, because the advertisers need a counterpart, right? And not always find it on the other side.
Yeah. And when I say direct, a lot of advertisers are worried, oh, do I have to go talk to 100 publishers one at a time? No, you can actually do direct through programmatic. And some of the projects that we've done is basically talking to the publisher and saying, what is the one exchange or one supply source that you prefer to sell through? And what is the deal ID or the seller ID that we should target? So in essence, if the ad buyer simply sets that up in their digital campaigns, right? Select one exchange or one supply source and one deal ID. They're essentially creating a direct buy using programmatic technology, right? The problem comes in when you have 45 exchanges or 45 supply sources turned on in any given campaign, and you're buying ads on millions of websites and mobile apps that you've never heard of before, right? That's where the problem comes in. But if you specify a supply source and a publisher ID or seller ID, then in essence, you're buying from that one publisher. So a lot more of the advertisers' dollars are going to the publisher for showing ads. So we kind of call that working media, like we've done in years past on television, right? So I think that's going to be a lot more efficient for the advertiser and a lot more profitable for the real publisher.
And do you have any other tips to media owners on how to best help advertisers and agencies?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we've been doing. So I've seen some of these media owners actually use my platform, Fou Analytics, to track their websites, right? Because now once we have the tag on the site, they can actually use those charts, the ones with a lot of dark blue. They can use those Fou Analytics charts in their sales materials and actually show to the advertiser, look, we have way more human audience than anything that you can buy in the open exchange. And it's almost like that's a way for them to show, not just tell, right? Because all of the bad guys' websites, all the fake websites are going to say, oh yeah, we're premium too. So how does a buyer tell the difference between someone that says they're premium and someone that actually is premium, right? So I think they're using that as a way to show that they have human audiences. The other thing that's happening is that some of the publishers are also giving the advertisers an in-ad tag, the Fou Analytics in-ad tag, so they can tag all the other stuff that they're not buying direct, right? Because they really need to see how bad it is. Again, because the failure of the legacy fraud verification companies, they thought it was fine, but now they're kind of saying, okay, we're not going to assume it's fine and low fraud. We have to take a look. So once they put the in-ad tag in and start to realize that it's literally 1% humans that their ads are being shown to, then they'll finally appreciate the quality and the human audiences that real publishers have, to the point where they'll say, oh, even if I'm paying a higher CPM, it makes a lot of sense because I don't have to buy as much quantity of impressions. I'm still going to get a better business outcome or marketing outcome from my digital campaigns if I buy from legitimate publishers.
And why do you think you met so much resistance across advertisers? Because I guess there are different type of situations and personas that you spoke to.
Yeah, I think in the past, there was a lot of resistance because they were buying a large quantity. They were getting much cheaper CPM prices, and the fraud verification companies told them it was 1% fraud. So it didn't seem like there was any problem. So back then, they wanted to believe that. So they basically fiercely defended their position, right? Because you can imagine if they already told their bosses, look, we're getting 10 times the quantity of ads, so our reach is going way up. And it's way cheaper because we bought through programmatic. And, those verification companies told us there's no fraud. So everything is awesome, right? So, why is this crazy guy over here telling us that there's a lot of fraud? So that's why in years past, I've had a lot of resistance. But I really think that in the years since the pandemic, so since 2020, the advertisers are more careful now. They know that budgets are getting tighter. So they're looking for ways to save money, and buy better, right? Do more with the money they have. And they also realized that, the fraud verification companies that they had been using in the past simply didn't have enough details, didn't give them enough correct information for them to act upon it. So now they're looking for better ways. So again, that's what leads to my optimism for the next, say, 5 years in digital advertising. I do think that there's going to be a positive change, right? But again, it's really up to the advertisers to take the first step. And I think publishers can play a role in educating the advertisers and the ad buyers and the agencies that serve them in terms of how to buy better media.
Now, the environment, the industry is completely different than if we look back at 10 years ago. To close our conversation, what can you tell to a young person starting today in the industry and they didn't see what the issues of the past?
Yeah, I think some of it is pretty common sense. It's really just to question everything, right? Not just assume that what you're being told is the truth. So I think a lot of people understand that if the person's selling you the snake oil, right? They're trying to get you to buy it. So they will tell you whatever they want to tell you to convince you to buy it. So that is the last person you should just trust and take their word for it, right? So I think a healthy dose of skepticism and asking questions. If you don't understand something, just ask. I think that's the best way to get to the bottom of it. And you will very soon figure out what things are smoke and mirrors, right? What things are snake oil that you probably shouldn't be wasting your time and money on. And I think that just going into that with this kind of attitude where you question everything, be a skeptic, I think that's going to help you get a lot further. And, ask for data, right? If they can't show you or if they refuse to show you, then something's wrong with that, right? There's something they're trying to hide if they're not open to showing you and explaining it to you in a way that you can actually understand. So I think, like I said, those are very common sense things. And, I think if young people coming into the industry, if they have a healthy dose of skepticism and common sense, I think that's going to be very helpful for them.
That's absolutely great. Augustine, thank you very much for your wisdom, for your look back at the past, and for the optimism towards the future. All the best.
Thank you. You as well.